Welcome to the bench, a space for conversations that help us uncover our truest self. No masks, no judgment, just love. My name's Rob. My guest today is Elise, joining me from
Hi.
her apartment in New York City, drinking a cup of coffee.
hmm
Santa Con.
Yeah, trying to revive a little bit. No judgment.
No judgments. So Elise, how would you, I like to start just, because people don't know you.
Yeah,
How would you describe yourself or I like, what do you do, but take that deeper than just what do you really do?
profession.
What's
Yeah,
like,
yeah. What is your life?
yeah, what does your life
Um,
look like?
yeah, challenging question. Okay, well, I guess I'll start with what I actually do. I'm a sign language interpreter, and I feel like I'm in a very fortunate position to say that's not just what I do. That's a big part of my life, right? I care a lot about access, the deaf community, disability rights, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I think in a way that kind of had helped define me and help me figure out a lot of other stuff that I actually do. I'm a runner. I'm a yoga doer, yogi, meditate. Um, yeah, I'm really into music. My parents are music teachers. Grew up around that for a long time. Um,
Have a wonderful voice
yeah,
yourself.
thank you. So yeah, I guess that kind of encompasses a lot of things that I do. I don't know.
Cool. No, it's perfect. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
just get at it. I think that's such a, such a hard question. Like that becomes such like the base question that we just lead with in conversation. And really, actually,
Yeah.
honestly, I think I might have shared this story on the podcast at some point, but I definitely shared it on the album. But I'll share it again because kind of like where Play Explore Love started, Play Explore Love started as this really just idea of what I wanted my life to be and what I wanted. And it really
Mm,
came out of my inability to answer the question, what do you do? Because I'm
yeah.
in California and I'm unemployed and I'm single and I'm sleeping on my brother's yoga mat. And a woman walks up to me and says, what do you do in a bar? And I'm like,
I don't know.
ah, and the first thing that came to me was I play with life. Like that was the first thing that came out.
Yeah,
And,
I like
then
that.
reflected on that over time and it turned into Play Explore Love. But it really is. Yeah. I mean, our life is so much more than what we do. Like,
Yeah.
and the way I've really started making sense of it is like those things like describe us,
hmm
but they don't define us. That definition is so much deeper. And
And I think that's where I struggle with answering that question too, is that like, can you really like to capture the essence of like what you do and like who you are and what you're doing with your life in a couple words or like in something that describes that, right?
hmm,
I think it comes from knowing someone, kind of like knowing who they are, and you're like, that's what that person is or does. So it's hard to answer, especially for yourself. You're like, oh, well, I do yoga, I run sometimes. I don't know. Like, how do you answer that?
totally.
So it's
And I
interesting.
think it becomes like I found, I don't know if you found this, but like on this kind of journey to uncover our truest self and like
Yeah.
these kind of normal questions that society tends to
Mm,
ask are a real struggle to answer.
yeah.
Like it's like I know that
Yeah.
you're like just asking what the weather is or like what do you do because
Yeah.
that's like like that's just what's
hmm
acceptable. But it's like I can't answer that, and then it's like, but do I just give you the societally acceptable answer, or do I do something a little bit different and throw my own
Yeah.
flair in there? And what's that gonna, it's like
And how are you going to take that,
how are
right?
you gonna take that? And yeah, it's and then am I just doing that because I want to be all like, oh look at me, like
Where's the
I'm
ego
doing the
kicking
work.
in,
Like, where's the
right?
ego kicking in on that, right? Like,
Yeah.
and yeah, relationships, man, in general, I think just
Yeah.
navigating. And that's the piece too, right?
And
On this, like, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, you're fine. I it's funny because I was having a kind of a heart to heart with a good friend of mine last night, and we were having this really like deep conversation, kind of similar to these kind of things, like speaking your truth and all of that stuff. And we were talking about it, and we talked about that intersection of like the ego. And me and this person had never had this kind of conversation before, and I was like, I didn't even know you thought this way and you actually cared about this stuff. And so I think where we're like, I don't want to mention this sometimes because I feel like I'm just doing it for the ego, or I think they're going to view me as, oh, she's saying that to brag or whatever, right? And I think once somebody like puts one little thing in, it makes everyone feel okay to actually have these kinds of conversations. And I think we just need more spaces for that. And I think that that's a part of the problem. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Totally. Well, I think we all like, that's what I mean. That's why I started Play, Explore, Love. Like that, like exactly what you
Yeah.
just said
Yeah.
is like, I was going through this space and really going through a lot of this stuff a couple of years ago. Still, yeah, I mean, right. It's like this
Yeah.
process
It's a
of growth
practice.
it's a
Yeah.
practice, right? And it's ever evolving, but it's like, I was so lonely and I didn't
Yeah.
have anybody to talk to. And like like the people I was around probably would have talked to me about it, but like, you don't know who's willing to take that mask off too. So it's like, I'm in
Yeah.
this new space. I'm not really
Mm-hmm.
fully confident in all this yet either. Like, I'm really working through all these new identities and ideas. And then
Yeah.
I don't want to take that and expose it to somebody else yet, because, but
Yeah.
really a lot of the times that other person might be feeling something similar and they just don't want to take the
Yeah.
mask off.
Absolutely. And I love how you say like take the mask off. And I think when I kind of started this journey, I was in a really dark place, I think, at first, because all my preconceived notions of like what made me happy and what my path should be and all this stuff, like all of a sudden made no sense. And I didn't know what to not like replace it with, but I was like, well, then what? Right. And I think a lot of times, like with people I talk to, um, they kind of give you that like norm answer, if that makes sense. And I feel like I had a hard time opening up about it in a lot of ways for a long time. And I feel like that was good for me in the sense that I got to actually really analyze myself. Um, but I think it wasn't really freeing, and it didn't allow me to actually heal and actually understand and actually build and develop this life that I now have and this really wholesome happiness that I now have until I really started talking to people about it. And I think that took such a long time. And then I realized, I was like, oh, there's a lot of people in my life who really would have understood this,
Mm.
right? And, wherever you're at in your journey, we could be at different places, but we understand some of these key concepts and we can kind of empathize with each other. And such a beautiful thing that I heard recently was just like, everyone wants to feel loved, heard, and accepted, right? So I think we take that mask off and we're like, am I going to feel one of those things?
Mm.
So, and I think it's such a beautiful thing to experience because it allows you to empathize with others when they start to do that about
Mm-hmm.
themselves, and no matter what stage they're in. So you don't judge that they haven't come through this journey yet, or you just understand where they are and you accept that, and you can learn how to make others feel like that's okay to continuously take off that mask. So,
Mm.
yeah, I feel like that was kind of a non-linear rant, but
You
I
know,
hope
and
that
that's
made sense,
no, it did. It totally, and that's how all of these, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
conversations in real life are nonlinear rants, right? It's not like
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
the fun.
Yeah.
That's really what I've been trying to create in this podcast, is like, it's just us talking and you're going through your
Yeah.
life and I'm going through my life,
Yeah.
and no, like I don't have notes or like it's just, we're just
Mm.
here talking.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, to go with that point you were just making, I think that's really where the work in ourselves comes in, because when we rely on somebody else
To
to
validate.
then validate, right? That was my thing. It was always looking to
Yeah.
other people to validate. Oh, I want to be a coach because I want to be a coach. But it was also kind of like, look at
Mm-hmm.
me being the coach, right? Tell me how
Yeah.
good I am. Like, a-
Yeah.
and it's just, once you learn to, I think that's really what it is. Like the whole like self-work and this
Yeah.
need to kind of go inward, isn't this like
Mm-hmm.
purpose of going inward and then never coming back out into the world. It's just saying, hey man, like I need to, like the caterpillar, the caterpillar, right, goes into the cocoon and hides
Yeah.
itself so then it can come out as a butterfly and re-enter the world. But it needs that time to like figure out what love and acceptance and being heard is for me. Like, how can I
Yeah.
love and hear and accept myself?
Yes.
Right? We all want it,
Yeah.
but we can give it to ourselves. That doesn't mean that we don't want it from other people. There's like, it's nice when it
Yeah.
comes from other people,
Absolutely. And it's
but
human nature too, I think, in a way, right?
and we're social beings. I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
like the, and the world is changing, right? I think the like the quote that I love that really inspired a lot of this for me was this Ralph Waldo Emerson quote where he says, "It is easy in the world to live by the world's opinion. It is
Mm,
easy in solitude to live by your own. But the great man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude."
love that.
And I think that's kind of been what my journey has been. You know, the first 23 years of my life was, I'm really great by the world's opinion. Like
Yeah,
like
yeah,
you chalk me up against the rest of the
yeah,
world and it's like, yeah, Rob's doing his thing, man. And then, but I got to a similar situation like you where I was like, but I'm not happy. Like I don't
yeah,
really like I know I've wanted this, but I'm here now. And it's like, is this really it? Like, is this really what I
yeah.
wanted? Like, and so then I went with the second part of that quote, which is the solitude in the crowd, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
what I realized for me was I never took the time to figure out what that solitude looks like. I didn't
Yeah,
even know. I can't be solitude in the crowd because I don't know what my solitude looks like. I've been living in the world
yeah,
all the time, you know?
yeah.
Um,
I
and
think,
even, go ahead.
no, sorry. I think, yeah, I went through that same, I think, process. And I think I made this realization that there was a long period of time in my life, grew up kind of perfectionist, that kind of thing. And I think I attached my worth often with, oh, I got straight A's, or oh, I like did this thing, or I, made it into this choir, or whatever I was doing. And I think it, it really, it's a shame because I think I quit a lot of things because I hit that plateau. And it came into like, yo, why am I attaching the worth of everything I do on how perfect I do it as opposed to enjoying it? Like, who cares if I suck at playing the piano? Like, do I enjoy it? Like, that's the point, right?
Mhm.
And I think so then you detach from that and you're like, okay. And you're like, okay, well then what makes my self worth, right? And that's where you have to do that work to go inward and you have to have that solitude. And I noticed when I was going through that time and I all of a sudden I was just like, okay, these things actually don't really matter unless I can turn in and understand how I want to spend my journey, right? I had a really hard time sitting alone. And that's part of why I hated yoga at first, because I had that really hard time, that hour on my mat, nothing else. I was like, I have to actually think and be with myself. And I was like, what is that? Like,
Right.
and I
And it,
struggled with it.
yeah, and it's terrifying because it's so different, right? You don't even have the tools to succeed in this game, right? Because all of the
Hmm.
tools that you have to succeed are based upon you achieving something, some outward person to
Yeah.
validate it, and
Yes.
right? But on this inner journey, there's none of that. It's you and yourself and your mirror.
Yeah. Yep.
And like, you know, and it's frustrating. It's like, you know, like I would sit with thoughts and I would like get this new idea about like of like letting go of things, you know, just like letting things
Yeah.
go. And I started sitting with it, and I was looking through old video journals recently, like 2 months in, I'm like, you just won't let things go. Why
Yeah.
won't you just let it go? Like you
It's so
understand it, you
real.
know it. Like if somebody were to
So
test
real.
you on this, like if somebody were to say, hey, give me the definition of what it means to let go, you could cite it and write an essay about it and do all of
Yeah.
the things. But why
Can't do
won't you let it
it.
go? Like, fuck.
Yeah.
And it really is just this total change in our it's a total shift in how we determine what our worth is, and it's so much less
Yeah.
about like the goals and so much more about the
Mm,
systems and understanding that the
yeah.
systems just take time and they like are going to
Yeah. And it's
change and evolve, and it's a process.
yeah. And I think like to kind of add to that is that it goes into the idea of non-attachment too. Like we
Mhm.
attach so much of our worth and so much of our happiness on these external things. And um like I know for me, like I have some friends who are kind of starting this journey and like I notice that their attachments are on, oh, I hit this really difficult goal, which is cool. Like that's important too. I think it's important to have discipline in your life, but it's discipline with a balance and it's with the non-attachment to the outcome, right? Like to be a productive member to society, to give back to other people, you have to have some kind of discipline. Like you have to be doing it, right? But you can't attach all your self-worth to like I hit this big goal and then everyone saw it, right?
Mm.
And it goes into that idea of attachment. And then I think the other part of that is, for me, like a big shift in my happiness was not only the self-love, but I think through self-love, you're able to just flow with it. And I think there's a misconception that that means that you will become lazy and complacent and whatever. And that's completely the opposite case. But I think it allows you to deal with things that you didn't expect to happen and the sad things that come up in life, because they're going to come up in life.
Yeah.
And know that this is just this I like the metaphor of like a river, right? You're flowing down the river. There's going to be these periods of time where it's these harsh waves and these titles and whatever, but that's okay, because that's going to end and then you're going to be in the smooth part again. And it's the unattachment to what's happening externally, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's enjoying that ride and enjoying that process, no matter
Mm-hmm.
what when we talked about like how we label what's good and what's bad, right?
Well,
Yeah.
I think what you're really highlighting is our society's fetish is the wrong word, but it's kind of this like, this like fetishization of yang, of activeness, of doing something.
Yes.
And we just totally let go of the receptiveness. We totally let go of the yinness. We think like, oh, if I slow down for a moment, I'm never going to get back up again.
Yeah.
And it's like, but if you have a day where you like just stay in bed all day, because it's like, man, I just had one of those days. Eventually you get out of bed again, and it's okay. It's okay that day that you spent in bed. Like,
yeah.
A lot of times that actually is like, action. Like there's a wonderful book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And, he talks about this, like this action and reflection loop, basically, that we act and then we sit and we reflect and then we decide what our next action is. And then we act and we sit and we reflect and we decide our next action.
Yeah.
But I think what we tend to fall into, or at least what I tended to fall into in the beginning of my life, was it's all action all the time. And I'm never reflecting. I'm just always over here and going. And then I decided, oh, I need solitude. So let me just go to the complete opposite of that, which is the solitude by yourself, right? And let me just reflect. And there would be days, like, I mean, even now, like, there will be like days where I'll go like 3 days and not leave the house. And I'm just like so in this funk of like all that. And it's like, no, I need some action now. Like, this isn't good either, right? Like this, like all the yin isn't good either. It's the balance, right? It's the yin and yang. It's the going back and forth. It's the action reflection. And I think it's like, but when we are taught, and it really goes back to non-attachment, right? When we are taught that the things that are over here are good and over here are bad, then we try and stay over here and avoid this. And so it stops being a flow, right? It just is, I'm all here. And it loses the fluidity of it. And then it becomes very rigid. And then we get very caught in it.
We shame ourselves right.
And then it's, oh, I have to be here and I'm here now. I'm bad.
Yeah.
What? No. Like, no. You're just exploring.
I think, yeah. Like, I think for me, I like a couple things happened that kind of made me redefine how I see the world a little bit. A couple years back, I would say like 4 years ago. And all of a sudden, that's kind of when the walls fell down. I was like, all this action and everything. Why? Like, and so I did that complete opposite thing. And, my former roommates are watching this. I sincerely apologize, because I wasn't the easiest to live with that year, because I did a lot of sitting around and sulking and it was like I would think about things, but I'd forget to let them go, right? So I was doing all this self-analysis and this hard stuff, which is important, but only in a very serious sense. And I think I got bogged down often. And I think I did this extreme and then this other extreme. And it goes back to like Buddha and his path of like, okay, I have this extreme and now I'm going to give up everything and I'm going to live in poverty and that's going to solve this. And that's kind of how I felt too. It was like, okay, like I feel guilty for like my privileges. I feel guilty for all this stuff. So I was like, okay, like I'm going to be completely nice to everyone all the time, which is like so unrealistic, right?
It's just another attachment.
And yeah. And like I hit this period where I was just like, I'm just so unhappy and that's not helping anyone. And I think yeah, so I think I'm glad that I did that. Like that was even though, a year was a long time to have done that, but I think going through that and going through the two extremes helped me find that balance.
Mm.
And so like traditionally what we would have labeled like that year for me, and it's still kind of like I mentally label it this way, as like a bad year, right? It was such a good year because it led me to this such wholesomely happy place and like this beautiful place that I am in now that is, you know, how my life just completely changed in such a good way. But I think sometimes we hit these extremes, and I think sometimes you have to find the middle way and to find that balance point. And I think, like we were saying, like society always is like action, 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 action all the time. Nobody ever wants to do this other extreme. So we're doing this one extreme. How are you ever going to find that middle balance way if you never do any of the other, right?
Yeah. Well, or I think it becomes, because I really had the same thought was, oh, the only other option is to just completely denounce this extreme of action all the time.
Yeah.
Let me
And that's
just
what
do
I
the
did.
opposite, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, I'm not going to be attached. I'm just going to
Mm-hmm.
detach. And it's like,
Yup.
they're just the negation of each other.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you can sit there and say, oh, look at me, I'm all high and mighty. Look at how I've just thrown everything
Yeah.
away. But,
Are you,
are you happy? Like, is that
yeah,
my,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
my, the Sufi teacher Hazad and Khan says, like, it's hard to throw the world away and just be an ascetic and like
Yeah.
go off into the mountain. But it's harder to have those realizations for yourself and then choose to live in this anyway and play with it and be in it
Mm-hmm.
and show up with that solitude in the crowd, right? That idea of just like,
Yeah.
this is who I am. And I think we get in like religion, as we were talking about this, a little before we started this call, of like mainstream societal religion teaches us that it's somehow out here, like that God's favor is out here. I
Yeah.
am inherently a sinner and I need to go get
Yeah.
it and earn it,
Yeah.
as opposed to just being something that I inherently and intrinsically have, and
Yeah.
so then I feel I have to do the right things, the wrong things. But like, if you look at the great prophets, if you look at Jesus, if you look at Buddha, if you look at Muhammad, like they were all just talking about love. And if they're talking about that, like their wonder is Hazrat Khan says also, like their wonder is not in their works or their teachings or their miracles. Their wondering
Mm.
is in their wonder is in their loving manner. Their wonder is in
Yeah.
the fact that they were them. They explored for themselves what it was, and then they just became the laws, right? Like I think,
Yeah.
like I'm kinder now than I was 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, I would say I probably thought more about trying to be kind,
Yeah.
right? Because
Can
there was,
I
go ahead.
can I ask about that in the sense of I think this is really true for me. Like even when, I hate to, say this as like a oh me, but considered myself a pretty nice person through my life, right? But I feel like there are periods of time in the past where I was so focused on it, but then because I wasn't in that place of self-love, how am I going to love others, and how am I going to go and serve in this manner that I can bring the light from within, right? And do you feel like part of the reason why you're kinder now is because there's more internal love, and I think then that like flows out in a sense, or do you feel like they're unrelated processes?
No, I think they're completely related. I think that it's,
Yeah.
because to me, when I look at the way I started to look at the spiritual teachings is that they're a road, they're maybe a road, but they're like, yeah, they're in us, right? Like when Jesus says,
Yeah.
like, love God with all your heart and all your body and all your soul, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. Like he wouldn't say that if we weren't capable of love, right? Like, and
Yeah.
I think that's the, like because we fall into this space where we view the world so much through this like ego mind lens. We fall into this
It's a
space of
contest, right?
right. It's this separateness, right? We are always in this
Yeah.
space of separateness, and I am me and you are you.
Yeah.
Perspective. And there's this competition and this battle. And so like, I might be kind to you because I, you know, value myself as a kind person, or I might be
Yeah.
kind to you because society values kindness. But there's
Yeah.
still this like me being something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think when you start to go deeper, at least for myself, I've realized, well, I'm just love. Like at the
Yeah.
heart of it, from the soul's perspective, we're all just love. And so
Yeah.
like, at least, yes, in the real space, you are you
Yeah.
and I am me, right? But like from the soul's perspective,
We're connected in a
we're
sense.
connected, right? We're the same. And so how like
Yeah.
me being unkind to you is the same as me being unkind to me. So why would I be
Yeah.
unkind? You know, so it's kind of like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think about it. It's just like I think more of like, how would kindness show up, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily like what is kind. Like, and I think that's the, yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead if you've got something to share on that.
Yeah. So I think I've been thinking about this a lot the last couple of months, just love as a topic. Um, and I noticed that it's such a thing that makes the world lighter, if that makes sense. And I think for me, from my perspective, I think I come from a place of very like used to be very disciplined, hard on myself for things. And then when I started loving myself and being like, yeah, actually kind of who cares about that, right? Um, I think I came from this space of love for myself, and then it's love for the things that I do, right? Like when I'm on my yoga mat or when I'm running, I'm just like, how cool is this that I'm able to do that, and shifting that perspective and
Mhm.
having love for the then just things that I do, and then it spills out into the people around me, right? Um, and yeah, I think like lately I've been thinking about like what okay, I'm really wholesomely happy now, I like to call it, because it means that like I am sad, right? I get sad sometimes, and that's fine. But I'm wholesomely in this place where like I feel good and I feel purposeful and I feel all of these good things, right? So I'm thinking of like what makes that the last couple months. I was like, what made the last year and a half of that mind space and that relation with my surroundings and with my life. And I think love is really the answer. I think when I'm compassionate to others, like recently I had a situation where I wanted to be so mad at this person. And all of a sudden I stopped and I noticed myself. I'm like gossiping to Alyssa about it. I'm like, well, they suck. Like, and I was just like, what am I doing? I'm like, I'm making myself more upset about this situation by not having compassion for them and their perspective, and then not having compassion for myself and saying, I'm just gossiping and like labeling this person as bad because I don't want to deal with the fact that I feel hurt, right?
Mhm.
And so I think when we come from that place of love, because you're able to work through life's mishaps by
Mhm.
loving yourself and then loving the others around you that you feel, oh, they caused this for me,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And loving that process and learning that like that happening is actually a growing thing, and I can love that that situation happened.
Mhm.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, it's just the shift, right? It's just,
Yeah.
do you relate to the world from the ego, or do you relate to the world from your
Yeah.
soul? It's
Yeah.
no different. And I think we just, the reason that the relating to it from the soul feels like crazy or difficult or controversial or whatever, or stupid, I think sometimes they're like, what? Why would I do
Yeah.
that? I'm not going to be
All that
successful, you
hippie
know,
junk. Yeah.
right? All
Yeah.
that hippie junk,
Yeah.
like woohoo. Um, but it's really like, when you like, you just choose what, like for me it was, okay, well, what's the ideal? Like I'm living in this space where the ego is really easy and there's all this separation, and
Mm,
and everything is good or bad or black and white or right and wrong, and I get up when I'm up and I'm down when I'm down, and you know, I can
yeah.
fight it, and it's just natural. It's just not natural, but it's just
Yeah.
kind of, it's it's familiar because that's how we do things, and so we
Yeah.
tend to stick with what's familiar. But never not, but I think it really just, when we stop to sit, but is the familiar thing the ideal? Like when we really, like if we
Mm,
really stop to think about society, Like we've designed a society, because I think that's the thing. We think history is like, oh, these people did something. Like human beings
Yeah.
created the world that we live in, and we have the ability to continuously recreate that world. And we have created, I guess I'll just talk about America in general, but like we've created a space where people are living in poverty, where people are fighting each other, where people are feeling competitive, where people go home. And I think I saw something with like Juliana said something like 47% of like people under 35 or something like eat alone every night, or it might have been even higher. Let me ask her, because I'm really curious about. One second. What'd you find? You want to?
Hello. The statistic was that from February of 2018 to February of 2019, 45% of Americans ate alone.
Oh,
that's a lot. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot. That's almost half.
Yeah. Partially because I think also the stats are taken from families, and because we're getting married significantly later, like so many more people are eating alone.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Thanks, babe. You're welcome. Like we've designed this society in this way that really values power, right? Like if we think about like, you teach yoga and chakras, and like we really kind of prioritize as a society. I think a lot of it, if we really get into history, a lot of it comes out of colonization, right? Like it's a very white European, I'm going to conquer and own everything. Whereas like more indigenous cultures and peoples, we're more, right? Like they chose to live more open and connected and loving, and we've just gone a different route. But we could go back, right? Like I think we don't have to, like what I would sit with, and like my argument for love being it is like, if we think about it from a chakra perspective, the throat and up are more spiritual things anyway. But like the first four are kind of like survival,
those base,
sex, power, love, right? And it's like, we choose really which one we like us. I don't know. Cause it's tough. Cause right. Societally, like if you live in a space where you can't eat, like obviously the survival, or like, you're living in a food desert, or you've been affected by generational poverty or mass incarceration, or like, we allow to, that's a different conversation, I think. But even in those moments, right. It's like what I started to do was, okay, I can stay with this familiar space and continue fighting people and continue competing and continue that. But like, if I choose survival and Elise chooses survival, at some point we're going to do
We're clashing.
We're clashing. If I choose sex and Elise chooses sex, we're still clashing at some point. Like, no pun intended.
Not even think about that, Jesus.
And if I choose power and Elise chooses power, we're still clashing at some point. We're definitely clashing, right?
Yeah.
But if I choose love and you choose love, we may clash in those power things. We may clash in the other spaces, but it's like the clashing is both working for our unfoldment, right? It's not just clashing because for the sake of, right? Like in nature, violence happens all the time. Like death happens, like these quote unquote bad things happen all the time. Even like the growth of a tree, right? Like a seed shooting out of a sapling shooting out of a seed is destruction, but it's part of the love, right? It's part of
the process.
Yeah.
Well, I think power is a good example of like, you can, like if you have a power imbalance where you feel disempowered, right? That's not good. You have to be able to stand up for yourself, and you have to be able to I think about it in doing good for the world, right? Like, I'm not going to stand up to you if you're doing something horrible to someone else unless I feel like I have that power to do so.
Right.
Right. So there's positives to that. But if I don't come from a place of love within that power, it's nothing. It's not that positive. And I think that's the key, is that if you apply love to the other concepts, cool. If you're focusing on survival, you gotta focus on survival, right? But if you come from a place of love, you understand that my survival and your survival doesn't mean that I'm gonna die. And like, especially in our our current society where it's like we have so many people living in poverty and all this stuff. And I think often the misconception is like, well, I worked hard for what I do. And so if you take some of that and give it to them, then I'm not going to survive. Right. And it's like, no, that's not true. Like,
Right.
and I think it's just when you apply love to the other concepts, they can be so positive when instead of destructive.
Yeah. Well, I think that, we've unconsciously or consciously in some respects, but I think mostly unconsciously walked towards this more narrow view of I am me, you are you,
Yeah.
And if we're able to walk towards that view, we're also able to walk away from it. We're also able to expand. And when we really start to sit with it, it's like we feel all these internal threats by other people. But if we actually sit with it, like, does that other person really threaten me?
No.
Sometimes, yes. Like sometimes it is legitimately absolutely, absolutely. They are a threat and you need to put your walls up and you need to absolutely. Yeah. It's not like, it's not like you just walk through the world and
don't be naive.
Right. Don't be naive, right? Like people are going to hurt you, right? Like this is not like I got robbed by a guy a couple years ago, or not. Yeah, actually, because he was a houseless dude that I met at a car wash, and he asked for some cash. I gave it to him. He ended up finding out where I lived because he saw my car in front of the place. He knocked on the door, asked for more money. I was like, I'm supposed to be kind and give, and I gave him more money, and then eventually came back, and I was like, okay, I'm not giving you any more, but I just put dinner on. Come in and eat. And he came really cool. And then the next day I come home from school and he'd robbed our Xbox and computer because he left the back door unlocked while he was eating in my fucking house. Like, what the fuck?
Oh, no.
So the world is going to hurt you, right? I think it's just because that one person did, or in this instance could, doesn't mean I have to shut it all down. Like there's this story of an Indian saint. I'm an Indian saint who's by the river, and there's this scorpion that's drowning, and the saint goes to pick up the scorpion and it stings him, and then he drops it and he's like, ah, shit. And he goes to pick it up again and it stings him, and he drops it, and he goes to pick it up a third time, and this guy's watching the whole thing from the side, and he walks over. He's like, why the hell are you continuing to pick up this scorpion? It's stinging you. And the saint says, well, it hasn't changed its nature. Why should I change mine? And I think we just, we sometimes, there's something called the Nash equilibrium in game theory. And if we were to look at life as game theory, the best solution would be for everybody to choose love, period. Yeah. That is the Nash equilibrium of life. Everybody chooses love, Nash equilibrium of life. We're all good, right? But I don't shoot, but not necessarily me specifically, but a lot of times because of game theory, it's, well, yes, the best societally advantageous solution would be for everybody to choose love. But if everybody chooses love and I choose power, whoa, look at the advantage I could get. Oh, well, that person's going to choose power. Let me choose power too. And then we defect, right? Yeah. And I think it's just what I'm really trying to create, and, is just we choose love anyway. That doesn't mean we don't fight, right? That doesn't mean like Ram was talking about, in the 60s with, hippies versus police. We still should fight that shit. Police are killing people in the street. That shit is not okay. Yeah. But it's not fight. And there are very real lines drawn there. I am on this side. You are on that side. But on the deeper level, it's all love. We're fighting for what this world could look like, and we have different ideas, but beneath it, my worldview still includes you, so long as you're willing to choose love, and acceptance and openness. And,
and I think the lack of that, having a lack of that perspective, divides us in so many ways. And I think it all goes back to feeling okay with yourself. I think often if I choose a place of judgment for others, right, a lot of times I'm judging because I'm afraid I'm lacking what they have, right? And I think we so often switch on that instead of coming from a place of hey, you can do that, I'm still me, who
Right.
cares,
Right.
right? Like, and I think,
And you might not be able to do that in my space, but like, you know,
cool.
cool.
Yeah,
That's okay.
and I think like, I think with this kind of talk, I often see people who kind of look down upon, I'll say this in terms of what I do for work, right? I'm a sign language interpreter. I'm very, very fortunate in that. I love what I do. And especially in New York City, that's such this like finance business culture. I often meet people who are like, oh, well, you know, what I do for, like, nobody enjoys their job, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as I start like talking about what I do, it's either met with two reactions. One of them often is like, oh, it's really cool that you found something that you really like. Like, I wish I had that. Or it's met with, wait, so you like teach? Like, do you make money doing that? Like, what do you work like once a day? And it's met with these judgmental questions. And I've noticed that oftentimes when it's met with these judgmental questions, it's never from someone who enjoys what they do. And I think it goes into this idea of love and idea of being okay with ourselves and just understanding that we come from a place of judgment when we feel like there's something lacking within us, right? And it's sad, and it's something to be conscious of, because it's impossible to say you're never going to judge anyone ever. But when you're aware and you're like, yo, Elise, check yourself, like when I'm doing that, I think I live at such a happier life, because at the end of the day, I'm actually making myself so much more happy, right, by coming from that place. Right. And so I think we all forget that we can gel with one another, and maybe we disagree with each other's, you know, what you do or whatever, but that's okay. And we can still have that love from within and understand that. And yeah, I don't know.
Right. Yeah. And I think it just makes, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Like, it makes sense when we look at it logically. Right? We were talking earlier about like it's easier to just judge. Somebody else does something that we disagree with, bang, judgment, right? That's the easy thing to go to.
Yeah.
But then, like, let's say I go through let's say I've met 100 people in a year, and I judge this person and I judge that person, and I've judged all 100 of them. They've all same and right. I've judged all 100 of them, and that was the extent of it. Have I grown in that year? I don't know, right? Like, I've judged a lot of people, but I don't know that I myself have grown.
Yeah.
What if instead of, maybe I still have the judgment, maybe same 100 people, but I have the judgment. Instead of it just stopping there, I go a little bit deeper, like what you're saying. Okay, where is that judgment coming from? What's causing it? And sometimes maybe that answer is, oh, they're just a dick. Cool, keep it moving, right? Like, sometimes that's legitimately the answer. But even
with that, wait, I have to argue with that though, because even with that, I've noticed that often I have that, like, oh, that person's a dick. And then I dig deeper onto that and say, okay, well, is it better for me to judge them and be like, what a dick, and write them off? Or is it better for me to understand why they got to that point? Because there's a lot of times, well, I would say most of the time, when someone's kind of a jerk, there's these previous things, how they were brought up, their parents, their siblings, the culture that they were around. And I think that person being a dick probably stems from other insecurities and things in their life. And when I come from that, from a place of compassion towards that and understanding and a place of love, I still come from that place of love. It still changes that, right?
Right, totally.
And yeah.
And it does. That's a really good point, because it still is, there is something in their dickness that is irritating me. Mm-hmm. Why is it, like, what is it that's irritating, and there's always something to learn from that. And like you said, like, there is this compassion to it of, like, compassion doesn't mean not talking about it. Compassion doesn't mean like agreeing. It just means accepting.
Yes.
Right? It just means accepting it.
I think for compassion in that situation for me means you don't have to allow people to be a dick to you. Like, stand up for yourself, like, do whatever, right? And you don't have to deal with that. Like, don't let someone rob you, right? But like,
I didn't let him rob me. He just happened to open my back door from inside, so I guess I did let him in the house.
But like, I think Yeah, but I think you don't have to agree with them, right? And I think like this is part of our problems with like politics and stuff right now, is that like we're coming from a place where like I don't agree with a lot of politicians, right? But if I lack to understand their perspective, we're always just going to clash no matter what. And I can be like this, right? So there's a difference, I think, sometimes with coming from a place of compassion doesn't mean allowing someone to continue shitty behavior and being okay with that. It means my reaction to it is going to change from, oh, you're being a dick, I'm going to condemn you in such a harsh way, and then you're going to push back even worse, and it's going to make the situation escalate and become worse. And it shifts that from, okay, you're wrong, but I understand. And people want to hear that, like, oh, they understand, they can, and then they're willing to work with you on it and actually think through it for themselves why they got to that point. And I think so often we're quick to be like, oh, like, well, fuck you, right? And where some things really should be condemned, like, I'm not saying that it's kind of one size fits all. I think when we do that, we often shut down the ability to have a conversation and the ability to show the person that they can look inward and understand themselves and change that behavior. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah, I think the one caveat I would add in there is like with politics, for example. I think what we're seeing right now, and this isn't like a blanket statement or not, but like for the most part, the Conservative Party or the Republican Party at the moment is, and even some of the establishment, right? Like it's really like, it's hard to argue with somebody and actually have a good faith argument when their argument is denying humanity, right? When their argument is like denying your right to exist. We're like, how can I like, I think there is like some level of like, hey, like I'm not gonna fight this fight with you because we just like,
but think about it this way too, like in that instance where like we talk about immigrants, for example, right? Like the appeal for the regular people and not the politicians. What the politicians are good at is appealing to the insecurities of people into believing that. So for me, like, I think if I'm talking to a general person who might believe certain things about immigrants, for example, I want to know why they come to that conclusion. And when it's I'm afraid for myself because this is what I'm being fed by, and this is then what I believe will happen if I allow this, right? Then I want to challenge that for them and be able to have that open conversation and be like, yo, like, put yourself in that shoes. And like, and so I think that's the difference for me, is where I sometimes think that like we've come to this place because we're just feeding on the fears and insecurities of people, and not everyone's in the space where they're okay with questioning that. And I think when we shut down the conversation, we shut down the ability to allow them to look at that.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't think it's not a shutdown. Yeah. I think what I'm trying to say is not that we shut down the conversation. I think it's just like, as a society, we can't entertain, like we are entertaining fascism in this country right now. Because it's like, both sides. Right. And like we've got to hear the Republicans out and we've got to hear the Democrats out because it's both sides. But like one of like I saw Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell go on the news the other day and said basically, like Lindsey Graham yesterday or this morning said that like, and when this when I share this 2 weeks ago, this will, not be as recent, like, as relevant. But like, he was like, I am not an impartial juror on the impeachment trial. It's like, what the fuck, bro? Like your job as a congressman, as a senator is to be impartial, is to be another branch of government, not to insert a dictator. Right. And I think like and I think that's really where it comes from with love, right? When love is not the guiding ethos, when love is not the space where we come from, because right now it's not, power is. Like straight up, we value power as at least the people who are in charge, like leadership, right? Like leadership, the politicians, the people who have the money, the up there want power. And so it becomes this, like, we are accepting, like somebody's in a war-torn country and they want to come here because they need life and food and a place to eat and rest. And we legitimately are like, yeah, no, they can't come, or we're going to put them in
Yeah.
cages, or like that.
Yeah.
Like, I think the real, like, I think on a very human level, on a very personal level, like it's
Yeah,
important to
that,
have conversations about things.
yeah.
But as a society, like there are certain
Yes.
things that just like aren't like we
That
can't
was
allow these things to
unacceptable.
be
Yeah.
acceptable, right? Like,
Completely unacceptable. And I agree with that. I
yeah,
agree with that completely. And
yeah. And it's
And
like,
I
that's
think
not,
it's a hard,
go ahead. No,
no,
sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, I think that's really like when we come to the other person with love, we realize that if they were operating from that same love space, they would
Mm-hmm.
not think the things that they do.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that we don't like talk about that, but it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's where the compassion
Yeah.
comes in, is like, they're just not there.
I think for me, like, I have a hard time sometimes with going through this process and understanding a lot of these concepts and understanding what actually really makes you feel fulfilled and happy, right? And what would really benefit the world in the way that there wouldn't be these inequalities if we all came from this space, right? I think the frustrating part for me has been how to spread that in a way that people are willing to listen to it and actually look within. Because I often, like, I feel like, and this goes into coming from a space of love, like, especially at this age, especially in New York City, I keep meeting people I feel like are so unhappy and who are really operating from this power place and from this, oh, I just like go to work and I want to make a lot of money and go home, and I don't really know, I don't really have any hobbies, I don't know, like that kind of thing. And I feel like I see that very often, and I think it's hard to know. I feel bad for those kinds of people, right? And a lot of times those are the people who have more right leading mindsets because they operate from this space of separateness and this space of, I don't know, non-fulfillment in a sense. And I struggle sometimes with how to spread this message, because I'm like, I know if you like went on this journey for yourself and not telling you what to do because everyone's journey is so different, you would be so much happier. But people, I think there's a resistancy to that, and it kind of plays into this where it's like, sometimes I don't know where the right way to spread this kind of message, because how can you force someone to see love in that way, right? And I think it's hard to witness those things and know how to, yeah, I don't know, like, when is the time where you're just like, well, that's you, or when is the time where you're like, you really could do this, and
Totally.
yeah, I don't know, it comes from a place of like sadness for me when I see it, and I see so much of this, and I just, yeah, I think it's hard to, yeah, like, where is that, I don't know, how do you approach it, right?
Totally. Yeah, I think that it's so Hazrat Inayat Khan says that it's a sin to awaken somebody who wishes to sleep.
Yeah.
And so I think there are two very real things at play here, right? I think, let me take the first one of like the individual work. That's a personal thing, you know, and like we sit where we sit and we say, man, your life could be so much happier and authentic, and you, even if you still do the same thing, it's just like you could do it more authentically. And I see that, and I have compassion for it because I was you in some extent, and now I'm not. And I know, like, and that's where the love comes in. It's like, I know you could be this, but it's not my responsibility. I think I guess speaking personally, what I have found is that, because I used to be the same way, like, oh man, I'm doing all these things and I want to give it to everybody, and I just want you all to have it too.
I wanted to share it. Yeah.
And it's like, I think the thing that we can do in this respect is live it unapologetically. But that doesn't mean like my friend Jazz, who was on the podcast a couple weeks ago, has a wonderful quote where she says, I glisten like a spider web in the sun, enough to be noticed and ignored in one breath.
Yes, I like that.
You know, and it's kind of like, yeah, I don't need to shine, I don't need to tell you, but if you're like, I like to think about, like, you know, I'm holding the information in hands like this, you know, I'm not pushing it on you, but I'm not hiding it either. Like if you're tossing
if it
and turning
appeals to you, you'll
right,
come
if you're
to
tossing and turning, like if you're ready to wake up, I'm here for you. If you're still sleeping, sleep on, brother. You know? But I think where then the distinction, like that's on the inner work, like that's the you becoming the truest version of yourself piece. But then I think on a society level space, of like, when do I step in and say this thing or fight on this ideal and whatnot? I think like really as a society, we just need to decide what is like the base level expectation. Like we have no floor in our society. We are okay as a society because your actions decide what you're okay with. We are okay with people starving and going bankrupt and dying because they can't have health care.
But like that's my point. Like I'm not okay with that, right? And
right,
I think
right.
But like we talk about, like if other people come from the space of love, we wouldn't have that. Like how do you then get these other people to see that, right? Like
so I think from that perspective, we have to fight for the society that we believe in. And I don't think it's oh, I need to sugarcoat around this or not. It's I believe in this. And I believe in this because I am coming from a place of love. And I know that you're capable of believing this too if you came from a place of love. And right now you're not. And maybe we need to fight. And that's okay. You know, like Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Like yoga, right? Like Krishna's like, hey, bro, you got to fight. And Arjuna's like,
hey, bro. Nope. That's exactly how it's written too.
It's exactly how it's written. That's canon. That's the literal Sanskrit translation. Like, hey, bro, you're a warrior. You got to fight. And Arjuna's like, no, I'm not going to fight my family. I love them. I can't. And he's like, no, but your position right now is to be a warrior and fight. And like, you're fighting for the society that is rooted in love. And I think like that is, you know, I think that's where and there's no right or wrong. Okay, that means you need to say it and talk to this person in this situation or not say it and that. But it's just like, I think what we, coming from this perspective, we are trying to move the world towards love. And on a very individual level, you are going to move towards love in your own way. And it's not my job to you know, you might not move there in this lifetime. That's okay. You know, get it in the next one. Like, but as a society, like I'm going to do what I can in my own little ways to create a space of love around me. Whether that be fighting for policy, whether that just be inviting friends over for dinner and like creating a community, right? I think it's like, just do what you can. Like for like, so like, I know I've been talking a lot. I've been kind of
no, go ahead.
Like these last 3 years, the last 4 years, really. I mean, not that our country has like significantly changed. But I think it's like the racism has become more open. And there's a lot of really awful shit going on in the world. There's a lot of hate and there's a lot of injustice and there's a lot. And I remember like feeling, especially when I was doing all of this inner work, like I'm not doing anything from this and look at me just benefiting from this privilege and I'm not actually helping anyone else. Like, how can I do this? How like, selfish of me.
Like, that's how this journey started for me, like in that exact space. And I think like then I went through that period where I was like, oh, like I have to do everything. Like, right.
I got to be the loudest, most vocal person about all these things. And I think what I've realized is that at the end of the day, like, yes, I support significantly progressive policies and humanistic policies because I think that is what a society that is rooted in love would choose. So that's what I choose. But it's like the way that, but even if we were to change policy, that's still not the end of it, right? Because even if it's okay, now the conservatives are in power and we switch over to the progressives being in power. It's just a shifting of power on the poles, right? It's not about like, if we're really going to be liberated, if we're really going to find freedom, it's got to be love. It's got to be this holistic thing. And so that was for me, like, what can I do to help that? Well, I've been playing with this idea of play, explore, love. And I see that the world needs a practice and a community. So let me create that and let that be my way of, you know, I don't think it has to be like, you don't have to be a policy advocate. You know? And you also don't have to go ahead.
it ties into too, like finding like what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and what helps other people too.
Right.
And I think love and change, yes, there's like this upper tier level of like policy and things that have to happen. And I think, yeah, that's not something that we should look over, and certain people have to be involved in that, right, to make that happen. But I think
and shout out to all of you
bigger,
that are doing that work.
yeah,
Give
yeah, right,
celebrations and
seriously.
snaps to everybody who's doing that work.
But I think that like on the ground level, the surface level, like what I do in my day to day has an effect on other people, right? And so if I live this life in an authentic way and in a loving way, that ripples, right? It ripples to people. And I think that, like you were just talking about, like, okay, great, it would be cool if like policy shifted, right? But that's not the end. The end is when we all feel this sense, right? And I think sharing that with those around you, I think is part of the way, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be, oh, like, look at this, awake. You have to be awake, right? It's like, hi, like I'm coming to you from a place of love and compassion. And I'll never forget when I was in high school. I mean, the reason I got into interpreting was because I was volunteering, and the teacher who I was volunteering with was one of the nicest, most compassionate people, warm people that I've ever met. And I remember seeing that and gravitating towards it and be like, I want to be like that. Like, that's what I strive to. And I think when we live by that example, other people see it and are like, oh, they made me feel this warm and compassionate sense and this judgment-free way. And I should do that for others. And I think that spreads. And that's, I think, one of the most important things. So I think if anyone takes anything from this podcast, I think opening yourself up to a journey of love for yourself and love for others and being that for other people, I think that's the point of life, right? It's healing and love. And yeah, I just think that we overlook that sometimes.
I'm really glad you just said, because that's what really it was for me too. I met these other people. I think I met these other people that just manifested in a way that I was like, wow, I really like that. Like, you're just so open and seemingly authentic. You can never really judge, but it's like, it just feels like something it just feels nice around you. Like, I like this. And and then it's okay. How do we become that ideal, right? What pieces of that do we take for ourselves? Like the one, the one that people use them, like, what would Jesus do, right? You see people all the time with these bracelets, like, what would Jesus do? And then you've got people who talk about the Bible and are like, we need to persecute the gays and put these kids in cages and like,
because it's rooted in judgment versus love, right?
Right. Whereas what would Jesus really do? Jesus would welcome every single person in and say, I love you. And but like, you can't, like, as Ram Dass said once, he was like, nobody gets through the gates of heaven. You can be somebody all the way up to it, but then eventually you have to like be nobody. And you can't be somebody being nobody. Like, that doesn't, I think that's the thing, right? Like, that's what I kind of fell into. I see these other people and look how kind they are. And I want to be kind. So now I'm going to be that, and I'm going to identify it. And I just shift from here to here without actually doing the work to just, but who am I, And then kindness just comes, but that takes time, right? That takes, takes
and
time.
I think, like, I've noticed for myself, like, acceptance, happiness, kindness towards others, like, all of that stemmed from, I'm okay with this.
Right.
I'm okay with my flaws. I'm okay with X, Y, Z, right? And I'm okay with that. And I understand the journey and the process and the healing. And I think with that then came acceptance of what happens. Happiness in what I do, non-attachment to the outcome or certain goals or whatever, or the ego sometimes, and kindness then. And I've noticed recently, I was like, in the last 6 months, I've really kind of made a conscious effort of like self-love and like noticing when I put myself down and I shame and reframing those things. And I've noticed that I didn't consciously try to be nicer to other people. but my reactions to other people have shifted as a result of that. And I think we think of kindness as like this external thing, but it really starts with the internal. Yeah, and it's all about finding your journey, and then all of these other things that I think people misconstrue as the journey: setting a goal, being disciplined, you know, having a relationship, whatever the situations are. We think that is the journey, but it really starts with this journey, and then it leads to these things happening.
Right. Yeah, and I
Right?
think in relating with other people, like when the part of the problem why we struggle to relate to other people is that I'm here, here's my mask, here's your
Yep.
mask,
Yeah.
here's you, right?
How many
So it's like,
layers?
how many layers are
Yeah.
we fucking looking through? Like, it's like,
Yeah.
and really what we're doing when we do, the work is just working to kind of take that veil or that mask away from us.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that we have to go rip the mask off of others. It just unconsciously kind of gives permission and just gives this space of like, hey,
It's
you don't
okay.
have to. It's okay to take it off. You keep it on. I'm not going to put mine
Yeah.
on, but you keep yours on. That's fine.
Yeah.
But you can, take a little bit off if you want to. And I think that's really like what we really, like going back to what Juliana was saying earlier about like the people sleeping alone or eating alone. Like we need community. And
Yeah.
people are looking for that and finding all these communities and all these spaces. And you see all these workplaces like creating these informal work environments. And we have happy hour
Yeah.
at work and we're all hanging out
Yeah.
because people want community, but that community still has masks. That community still has, I've got to be this thing and you've got to be, that shit's
Yeah.
exhausting, man. Like trying to
Yeah.
be who you think everybody else wants you to be is fucking tiring.
That's more work than doing the work. Am I
Hell
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Like it is.
Yeah.
And because it feels easier. I think it's like, it's one of those things where like,
Safety.
would you rather pay $1,000 right now or $10 every week for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
And it's like right now in this moment,
Yeah.
well, shit, I don't have $1,000 in my bank account. I'm going with the $10 a month because I can pay that, right? But like, if you but you're going to be paying that forever, right? It's this recurring
Practice.
cost. Whereas I think the inner work is more of it's not a one-time cost, but like the work is never the pain and the like,
it's never over.
The cost is never over, but it's never going to be greater than the beginning. Like it's never going to get like, because then you have the tools. It's never going to get harder because then you might get hit with harder situations. But cool, you've been practicing for that, it's just starting is tough, right? Like starting is difficult.
And I think I noticed that like when I started this journey, I had gone through some times where I started unpacking these privilege type stuff and dealing with that, like we had just talked about, and then a relationship ended. And it was a really eye-opening moment for me because I realized, looking back, and me and this person have had this conversation after the fact, I wasn't opening up. I wasn't being my true self. And I think in a lot of ways I had started this big unpacking journey, and in a lot of ways I couldn't talk about it, but I was so afraid to. And this other person could tell that the mask became a mask and another mask, right? And then their mask. And I think it caused so many problems. And I think at the root of that, I'm so glad that happened because it made me re-examine how I relate to others. And I started realizing and looking at all my relationships and saying, oh shit, like in a lot of my friendships, I've really been doing that my whole life, right? And I'm like, I'm so afraid to just be like, this is me. Like, and in a lot of ways, I had bits and pieces of that. And it wasn't until I did that then I was able to really not only enjoy my life, but have these more fruitful relationships. Like, and in ways that are so accepting of the people around me. And I think it then changed my relationships with people that I was closer with, like, because I didn't feel the need to change them or make this perfect mold, or I don't know, it's freeing in such a beautiful way. And I think that was such a biggie, and it kind of came at the perfect time because I had started unpacking all these other things, and then that added and happened, and then I was able to just start from the ground up, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And view like, okay, I'm dealing with all these things and how I want to be involved in the world and my community and whatever, but I'm also able now to see this mask, and those two things coincided with each other in a lot of ways, and I'm glad that they happened at the same time because I needed that. And it was really hard at first. Like I mentioned, like I spent a year like sitting on my couch trying to like ignore it. I thought, and it's funny too, my roommate commented on this. When it first started, I was shopping a lot. And it was like this external way to block out what I knew I needed to do. And I think we so often do that. And that was before I felt okay to talk about it. And then when we started talking about it, they're like, I noticed you were doing these things, you know? Yeah. And then in that process, I realized that like we were saying, like, you're going to fight with, you're going to clash with people. Well, my clashes were so defense, and not, okay, like we're clashing because we disagree and let's just hash it out and talk about it. It was like, you're accusing me of being a poor friend in this situation, and I'm going to go on the defense. And I remember that happening with a good friend of mine, and I can't remember where I started or why I got here, but I think it was just such a beautiful moment for me, like a year after that, to look back on that and be like, if that happened now, I'd be like, yep, I was wrong, right? And like, I think that's just such a beautiful shift because it leads to all of the other things being okay in your relationships and in what you're doing and all this stuff. So again, I can't remember why I started or where I started.
That's cool.
I don't know. It came around to something. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think the main thing I think you're saying is just this acceptance of it, right? It starts in this just acceptance of what is, regardless of what is, you know, it's just, okay, here we are. It's all okay. Let's look at ourselves. Let's see what, and then it's like, you know, for you, what you noticed was, whoa, look how I'm showing up in these ways and how it's really affecting things. And I would like that to change, you know, so I'm going to do the work to change it. Whereas like my brother, like another example, like he was talking to me one time about, he's like, man, I'm always late for things. Like I just always, like, I'm just running on my own clock and on my own schedule. I just always show up late and I just always feel so bad. And I was like, well, you know, have your friends said anything to you about it? Like, do they have an issue with it? And he's like, no. And I'm like, well, do you like, what, like, is it negatively impacting your life to kind of be running on the schedule that you run on? And he's like, no. And I'm like, okay, cool. Then who gives a fuck? Like,
who cares?
You know, who cares?
Exactly.
Keep doing it. That's not what needs to be changed right now. Maybe at some point, glad you noticed it, but like, that's not necessarily the thing that needs to change. And so it's like, like noticing it doesn't mean it needs to change. It's just, it can't change unless we notice it.
Yes. And I think that goes into too, like accepting your flaws, like, and the difference between working on yourself and understanding that growth is just this never ending process. Mm-hmm. And I love, like, I know I've kind of mentioned this a few times, but Red Table Talk with Jada Smith, she talks about like, it's this growth process. She's like, I'm like 40, whatever. And I'm just now thinking like, oh, I'm in this really good space and I'm okay with these flaws. I'm having the self-love. And she's like, and that's never going to stop. And growth doesn't mean that I'm looking at all my flaws and I'm saying, okay, I'm changing all these things right now. I'm saying, okay, what's most pressing? What's really inhibiting my life? Start with that, right? And then I kind of go down the list, but I'm okay that like, that's my lifelong process. And then there's going to be things on what I label flaws where I'm just like, yeah, that's fine actually that I do that, right?
Right.
Who cares? Who does it affect?
Right.
And so I think that that's just such, it goes back to my favorite words in this space are like practice and process, because we forget that this isn't like I say, like, oh, the last 2 years have been like the best for me for all these reasons. And I feel wholesomely happy. I say that in a sense of like, I felt really sad this morning when I woke up. I don't know why. I just did. And that was okay. That was cool. Like, and now I feel okay. Like, And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that every day is so perfect and blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's just that you're on this journey and you're on this growth process and you understand the ebbs and flows of it and you go with it, right? And it's a process and it's a lifelong process. And we forget that understanding your flaws doesn't mean that you're fixing everything. It means, what do I need to? What do I just accept?
Right. And even, like, who says those things are flaws, right? Why do I consider that thing to be a flaw? Like, do I think it's a flaw because, it's really inhibiting the life that I'm trying to live?
Yeah.
Or a flaw because somebody else told me that
Told me that's wrong. Yeah.
I'm not supposed to be super expressive. So that's a flaw that I'm well, no, fuck you, man. I'm getting out how I get down. Like, And so I think it's really just learning for yourself, just taking the time to figure out for yourself what it is you want in this life, right? What it is that your ideal is and not somebody else's. And
and I think that was a long time for me. And I think now, like, I realize my lifelong thing that I hope to continue and what I want to cultivate in my life is this living with love and warmth for others. That's A. And for myself, and understanding when my ego trips in versus what I'm cultivating for others, right? And B, acceptance and flowing and enjoyment of the journey. And we forget the joy part. And like, what I love about Place for Love is the play part, right? We forget about that. Like, it's okay to have fun, you're doing the work, but you're also enjoying the process. And I think for me, it's like the combination of those two things. No matter what else comes along in my life, if I'm doing that and I'm flowing with the journey and I'm just accepting and I'm okay with myself and I'm loving others and I'm loving myself, doesn't matter anything else. That's how my life's cultivated. And I think that's what's made me so happy. But that process is going to trip up, right? Like I was saying recently, I was like gossiping about someone, and no, I wasn't coming from a place of love, but that's okay. That's the process, and that's the work. And I think for me, that's what I found really, really cultivates a good space in my life. But that's could be so different for you, right?
Totally.
And I think finding that intersection and finding what you want your life to look like is so unique to everybody. But I think the core part of what makes it is like loving ourselves and loving others. And I think that's going to be universal for everybody.
Yeah. I think I remember my freshman year of college, I was talking to a friend and she had shared the quote, like, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And I remember saying like, well, what the hell's the point of the journey if we don't get to the right destination?
Young Rob,
like totally different, right? Like I was like, what's the point of the journey? Like we're not getting to the destination. Why? Like if we're not going to get there, why do it? Like what's the point? And now I obviously have incredibly different opinions on that phrase, and I would think that differently. But it's like the majority of even if you want to get to the destination, the majority of your life is going to be the journey getting there. So if you only learn to enjoy the destination, if you only learn to be present when you are at where you're trying to get to, that's you got
a year of your life,
less than 1% of your life, right? I mean, like, it's like I remember being, and this was actually kind of what got me out of college coaching. Was we won a championship, and the next October, we're in the gym trying to win another championship. You're right back. Oh, we're on the top of this mountain. We're so successful. And now we're right back. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
And like, if you are living for that moment, it's going to be, those are few and far between, maybe never come.
Yeah.
And fleeting, even if they do.
Yeah. And I think we forget that we adapt to that, right? Like anything new in your life, like think about when you get like, you got your first laptop or your first iPhone. It was so exciting for a few days, right? And then you just adapt and it's like, this is my life, right? So when you're living towards like, okay, this external thing is going to happen, it's going to be the best, like you win a championship, how long does that last? And I think we forget that like there are spaces for that. Like I'm not saying don't enjoy new things. Like, but I've noticed in my life, this is still something that I work on. I often am like, I need a new project. I need something. And I'm about to run an ultra marathon, right? Like that's like I need a new project. I need something like something new. And I think I forgot. I think it wasn't until a couple years ago that I was like, why no? Like, right? And so now I'm in a space where I'm like, okay, it'd be cool to like run another marathon, for example. But what I really liked about the last one that I ran wasn't the end of, yeah, that felt good. And what felt good about it was only because my mom ran her first half marathon. Seeing her so happy during that moment was so cool. And the process of the training I enjoyed. And I was like, all of a sudden, it wasn't the goal, right? It was the steps along the way where I was like, oh, cool. Like that long run made me feel really good today. And it was shifting that from I'm doing this because I want the goal to I'm doing this so I have another addition of a hobby to my life and help me like that I just enjoy. Like right now I'm taking up the piano again and I suck at it right now and it's frustrating, right? But who cares? Like I'm not playing and I'm not strict about how much I play it because I don't equate the purpose of it to getting really good at it. I equate the purpose of it, it's really meditative, right? And I think it's that shift in what we do that allows us to, you can still have those goals and do those things. Like, but the point, like part of the reason why I signed up for an ultra marathon wasn't to do it. Well, yeah, it was to do it. But that's going to force me to go up into a nature preserve for most of the spring to train and be in nature for months, right? Which I probably wouldn't have done living in New York City otherwise as consciously and as much. So I think that shift allowed me to enjoy what I do and not feel the shame of what if I can't do it? Like, who cares, right? Like, the point was the process.
Right.
And showing up. And yeah.
Yeah. And even if there are plenty of things paths I've walked down. I'm like, yes, I'm going to do this. And then I get a little bit down the ways and I'm like, nope, you know what?
Yeah,
I'm not going to do this. You know, like I signed up when I moved out to California, I was like, I want to give back. I signed up for a job with Amnesty International, like street canvassing. I worked 3 days. I came in the fourth morning. I worked for 2 hours. I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. I'm out. Like,
no.
Like this is like, it could have been, I jumped in. I was like, this seems like something I would be interested in. Let me jump into it. And I got a couple days in and I was like, yeah, no, this definitely is not it. You know? And like, yeah, I think just because we start something doesn't mean we have to finish it.
Yeah.
You know, but just because we're trying to finish something doesn't mean we can't enjoy the journey of doing
the
it. Right?
journey
like,
of doing it. Yeah.
It's all part of it, I think, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's an interwoven connection of just like being okay with, because I think the other side of it for me is just, I take pride in the fact, or not take pride is kind of the wrong way to say it, but I enjoy the fact that I have other things outside of work that I enjoy. And I think that that's important. And I think that that's lacking often. So part of the reason why I want to try new things and why I like doing yoga or different things is just having all these different outlets that it allows you to just have things that you enjoy in a sense. So I think for me, like a way to do that and a way to cultivate that is just understanding that just try new things. And that's like, it's okay if you hate it, right? You can always quit. And I think there's so long in my life, I was just like, I have to be really good at this or not. And so I'd quit not because I didn't enjoy it, but because I wasn't good at it. And I think, I very, very recently came to this space in my life where I'm like, I don't shame myself if I want to quit something. Who cares? And I feel like it's good to try things. Like, and I think, it's that openness to have other outside things that you enjoy. And even with like job stuff, like I'm thinking now of like changing my position at one place that I work, and I'm so afraid I'm not going to like it. And I was thinking about it the other day. I'm like, I'm stressing over something that A, I don't even know if it's going to happen. B, I don't even know if I'm going to hate it. And C, why do I think that then that's going to be the rest of my life and I'd have to stay there? Like,
Right.
why can't I come from the perspective of like, I can try it. If I hate it, I'll just not. Like, right? And like, why do we have that pressure on ourselves to be like, yo, you got to do it if you start it? Like,
Right.
no.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Nice
cool.
area.
Well, that's probably a good place to stop. I do like to
Yeah.
finish it with, I mean, you kind of already answered this, but if you were to tell people one thing,
Yeah.
what would your one thing be? What would you tell them?
I think this two things. Can I say two?
Sure. Yeah. It's your world. You
Okay.
make the rules,
Yeah.
right? That's how.
All right. So the first thing is my journey was my journey, right? In the sense that what worked for me and the length that it took and what sparked it and all of these things was unique to me. And I think each person should find what works for them and what helps start ignite like their journey of this kind of thing. I don't know what we would refer to this. I don't know. But
Your own life is your like your life is
yeah.
your own curriculum. You know, like you don't like
So
you can take influence from others, but it's
yeah,
like, it's
like don't like look at what I just said as like this is the path and it's the only path and that's what's gonna make you happy, right? It's find your own journey too, and you're probably gonna come to these same conclusions of love, and that might be the end goal, right? But your path to that and your journey to that is probably gonna look different, and that's okay. So I'm gonna preface what I say next with that. And the next thing I say is just be open and willing to self-analyze and be mindful and be aware of when the ego trips in and question the things in your life, but do it from a place of love for yourself and light in that. And I mean that in the sense of don't get bogged down and be like, all these things, like I haven't cultivated all this stuff. I haven't reached this point of happiness or awakening or whatever. That like I suck, right? Do it from a place of, yo, these are my flaws, but that's cool. This is what I need to do, and that's okay. Yeah, and have that self-love while you're open to this journey, and while you really do think critically about the things around you and within, but do it from a place of lightness and love, and understand that it will ebb and flow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not imperfect. You're in process.
Yeah.
You're in progress. You're not imperfect. You're in progress. I think
either work. I feel like
either
process
work. Yeah.
works. Progress
you're not imperfect.
works,
You're in
right?
process. You're not. You're in progress.
Yeah,
Either
I don't
way,
know which
you know.
one it is. It's not the same. But yeah, so I hope that makes sense, and I hope people that speaks to people in a way. So yeah, thanks for listening to me rant.
Oh, thank you for being
Sorry,
on.
I'm like so dead this morning. Really, SantaCon like kills you.
Hey, I wouldn't have noticed unless I knew. And the flannel maybe
Right.
or those pajamas, whatever.
I bought this for a Halloween costume, but it's a men's oversized.
Oh
flannel.
yeah, you were the scarecrow.
Yeah, but this is the best purchase I've ever made. So yeah, I did sleep on this though.
It's like having a boyfriend shirt without a boyfriend. It's like you get all the benefits.
Honestly, buy men's clothes. They're so much more comfortable.
That's the actual one thing. Buy men's clothes. They're so much more comfortable.
That'll take you on the path. All right. Well, so thank you for having me on. It's so nice to just like rant and not like rant, but talk about this stuff in an open space.
Yeah, it was wonderful having you.
Yeah.
Cool.
I hope I see you soon.